Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players podcast and Stats Race Lens webinar for Breeders' Cups Pick 6 on Saturday. Peter Thomas Fornatale, very happy to be with you and chatting about this Pick 6. And I'm joined by a very esteemed panel today. I want to make sure before I get going any farther that the screen share is in effect. I'm looking at the webinar what I thought was the webinar control panel, and I'm not seeing oh, there it is. Boom. I've got the Equibase company's screen. We're looking at Stats Race Lens right there. And now I'm going to introduce our panel, starting off with my usual co-host in these type of proceedings. We just posted a short show with our thoughts on the draw. We're not going to be fully holding his feet to the fire for final selections in here, but we are going to be talking through his thoughts on the Pick 6. Later in the week, we're going to have our final answer show where we get to hear JK's final selections. But you know him, you love him. He's the people's champion. Big Stats Race Lens fan, Jonathon Kinchen. What's up, JK?
PTF, what's going on? I was very happy to get on here. I thought this was a great opportunity for me to rekindle my friendship with Scott Coles, and that way it's not weird when I ask him for a loan from his NHC winnings.
And we'll just go right into our next guest. He's been on the In the Money airwaves lots of times. We got to know him at the NHC with his stunning run to first place and through the final table. NHC champion, Scott Coles. What's up, Scott?
How's it going? If you saw my selections that I turned in for this, I think I have enough chalk to make JK proud today. I'm pretty sure it's pretty top heavy for me.
I didn't look at your selections because I wanted this to all be fresh, but it does seem like an interesting year. There's going to be a lot of heavy favorites. We'll get a chance to talk those through. And let's bring in the next member of our team. He's made a couple of very well-regarded appearances on the In the Money Network recently, giving out a pick 5 on our Naira Bets show that ended up connecting, or at least giving the thoughts that led many of our listeners to connecting in that pick 5. He is also somebody we met for the first time at this past year's NHC, Matt Vagvolgyi. Matt, how are you?
Doing well, PTF. What's going on?
Things are good. Without further ado, I think we should dive in to this pick 6 on Saturday. It starts off with the Maker's Mark, filly and mare turf, and we're going to start with you, Matt, and try to get your thoughts on this one. How are we going to get this pick 6 kicked off? And, of course, feel free to give us any insight into how you used Stats Race Lens to come up with these ideas.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, starting off this race and, make the joke about the chalk plays. Listen, this is a race where I think you're going to start off in that direction, at least for me. You have to start with, the two Sister Charlie. I call this horse the winning Powerball ticket. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's fast pace, slow pace, good ground, some give in the ground. Doesn't really matter. I think this is quite a horse, and I think when you look at the pace scenario as well, I think this horse sets up perfectly. So I think Sister Charlie is going to be tough to get around. I did take a peek at a couple other horses as well. The 7 Basilica I think is interesting to me, and it's actually one of the Stats Race Lens angles that I created. A pretty simple, straightforward one, but I think it's always a good idea to take a peek and look at the horse for course angles. Looking to see what horses have done really well, and I think a couple other angles that I'll talk about. It really we take a look a little bit deeper into the surface, and especially on the dirt, not so much here. But Basilica I think is a horse that really fits that horse for course type angle, and certainly a horse I'm going to use probably underneath. Another horse to add in there is Mississippi, but to be honest with you, I think Sister Charlie is going to be the horse to beat. It's got her, it's got the old buddy in there, Theus in there as well. So, I just think that this horse sits a perfect trip, and I think the race starts and ends with Sister Charlie.
Makes sense. I liked a lot of the points you made, and regarding your long shots, using Stats Race Lens to look for situations where that horse for course angle is particularly relevant. That makes a ton of sense to me. And then with the Mississippi pick, just in terms of collateral form lines being right there on the wire, going to be a last day, going to be a multiple of the price. I totally get it. Scott Coles, let's move on to your thoughts. Did you already tip your hand with your chalk comment about where you're going to get this pick six started off?
Sure did. We will we'll certainly be singling Sister Charlie and most of my tickets. The only thing I would have to add was when you click on Sister Charlie, you can kind of see the dominance that Chad Brown has had with Johnny V, and 39% in the last 33, which you can kind of see on the stats program page. And then kind of what Matt said is not worth repeating. I mean, it's just, it is what it is. The horse is a machine. And my second pick was also Basilica, 11 for 12 with 1 second at Santa Anita. I mean, it's unbelievable. And then his angle kind of shows that really well too. And the other one that I thought was a little bit interesting with some upside is Castle Lady, the 8. I'm not very good with this whole European thing, but we've seen one race in the U.S. It wasn't as much pace as you'd have thought. Canberra Park's a good up and coming horse, and I thought she ran pretty well. So I mean, there's just some interesting stuff underneath maybe there. Or take a look at that replay. There was some run there, and I just think second time here, I think she could improve. Really lightly raced. So it's another one I'm looking at as like if I have to get really, really deep into this, but most of my play will go through the 2 Sister Charlie.
And that's absolutely fine. No need to belabor any points as we roll through this pick six on Saturday. I should have said this at the top. I want to leave some time at the end to interact directly with our live listeners for this Stats Racelands webinar and do a little bit of Q&A. So absolutely no obligation there. One thing I want to point out that's cool as I'm just watching the visuals that Tom at Equibase is providing during this show. I love that functionality in Stats Racelands where you can page through the PP so easily with the color-coded chiclets on the side of the page, and you don't have to scroll like you have to do with some other PP provider stuff. You can just, boom, hit that button, go from one horse to another. I find that very helpful when I'm using Stats Racelands to do my form study. All right, JK, this pick six, I know it's something that you've taken swings at before on Breeders' Cup Day. You have been known from time to time to lean heavily on the chalk. All I'll ask is, do you see yourself singling Sister Charlie, or are you keeping an open mind and maybe looking to get a little bit of extra coverage in here for this Breeders' Cup Day pick six?
I see myself using Sister Charlie as kind of a single A horse, and then I'm going to use Mississippi as a single B horse. And look, I can't really fully explain it yet because I'm still working on it. But essentially what I'm trying to start doing with turf racing is I'm trying to establish just kind of that turn of foot and finding horses that can really quicken when the running happens. One of our guests we've had on our show a lot, one of the best horse players I've ever seen, Paul Matisse, has this idea that he's kind of ingrained in my head that turf racing is won in about 8 strides. Obviously stamina matters and class matters, but the race itself is won in 8 strides. So I try to find these horses that have that best 8 strides. And like I said, it's an idea I'm still working on, so I'll explain it when I explain it. But Mississippi and Sister Charlie are 2 that their last race in the Flower Bowl might not look that great because the figure was kind of slow based on the pace of the race, but they quicken like good horses. And I think those 2 horses are the ones that I want. Basilica is a very cool horse. I'd love to own her. I would have loved to have claimed her. But when the East Coast horses show up, the West Coast turf horses seem to want to look in a different direction. None of the Europeans really move me. I'll go with horses that used to be Europeans, Sister Charlie and Mississippi.
All right, let's move on to race number 8. It's the Breeders' Cup Sprint. We should point out here that this starts the late pick 5 with its 15% takeout. All the pick 5s on the 2 Breeders' Cup days with that low 15% takeout. I know that's something that's going to allow me to have a little bit of an extra look and try to get involved in the pick 5 as well as the pick 6. It begins here. JK, we're going to keep this with you. We got the news of the scratch of Landeskog earlier today. How significant is that change for you, and what's your early thinking in this Breeders' Cup Sprint?
I think it's extremely significant. There was an opportunity for Chancelot and Landeskog to hook up, and obviously now that's not going to happen. And Chancelot looks like he's got the chance to be loose. I think it's interesting that he's going to have the rider change. I think it's interesting that he's going to be going 6 furlongs again on a racetrack in which he ran second in a Grade 1 to one of the best horses in training in Omaha Beach. I think Chancelot's going to be dangerous in this spot, forwardly placed. And I think that his performance at Saratoga going to 6.5 was special. I give him an excuse for what happened in the Allen H. Jerkins, and I think he'll run much better here. Look, I think this race is really straightforward. I think that Matoli, Chancelot, or Imperial Hint have to win this race. I will not spend $1, not even a saver, on any other horse in this field.
Scott Coles, do you see it as simply as JK does?
I do. I wanted so badly to take a horse like Hog Creek Hustle, but or Catalina Cruiser. The draw kind of screwed Catalina Cruiser. Going to be stuck down on the rail. Hog Creek Hustle, I just think needs a little bit longer to be able to close in at a level like this. And with the scratch, I just think the best three horses that he just named are going to show. I think I put Matoli on top, but I'm going to be using them all three pretty equally. I wanted it to fall apart. I really wanted to look for something crazy, but now with the scratch of Landeskog, I just think it sets up perfectly for these three to go at it. And they've all run a crazy race in the past that is good enough to win this, and it'll be a really fun race to watch.
Yeah, it does have the makings of a real heavyweight fight, and I agree, very hard to get creative. Matt Vagvolgyi, do you agree that it's hard to get creative in here, or do you have something a little wacky for us?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Landeskog is a huge defection from the race. I saw that today. I kind of had to scrap a plan I had before. And no, I think that's where you need to go. I think every horse that we just talked about is where you need to play. One other horse that I would say that I would give a little bit of a shot to is Frenzy Fire. Just if for some reason it gets hot up front, if we can just click over to the true odds. Just one thing that I like to use quite a bit is looking at the late pace figures. I think that's key, where if you do see some different pace scenarios where, if you think a horse can shake loose, or if you think maybe you can get a hot pace up front, if you look at that late pace figure, I think Frenzy Fire could be in position to pick up the pieces. Again, not going to be at the top of the tickets with an A horse, but certainly a horse I would add into the mix to consider.
Sometimes in these sprints, some crazy things happen. The idea of taking the best closer somewhere, and maybe it's more of a vertical exotic play than the pick six we're talking about. Forense Fire for Matt comes out best on that. And this is another great screen you can see featuring those true odds, and also the pace, the race projection from Stats Race Lens as well. A lot of extra information baked in here, and we definitely encourage our listeners today and the folks listening to this podcast, if you haven't tried Stats Race Lens, we've got a special promo code, Stats ITM, and you can get discounts on any of the recurring plans with our friends at Stats Race Lens. Make sure you check that out. Take that opportunity as well. All right, let's move it on to the third race in this pick six sequence. And here we've got the TVG Breeders' Cup Mile. Matt, we're going to go back to you to start us off on this one. What are you looking at in here?
I'm taking a shot with Uni in here. One of my better players, one of my better plays of the day, I think. It's a tough race. I think the morning line says it all, but like a lot of these races are. But I am a current card holder of the Joel Rosario fan club, and I think he fits perfect with this horse. I'm going to be price dependent. I'm going to see, how much money this horse takes. I think I'll get a fairly decent price on it. But again, Rosario with Chad, you're certainly going to get the play there. I'm sorry.
Uni 7-2 on the morning line. What price? You talk about being price dependent. What price do you need to be interested?
At the morning line, if I'm 7-2, or above, I think that's going to be one of my bigger plays. Certainly a Got Stormy fan. There's nothing wrong there. There's a couple of horses in there I have to divorce myself from prior players that maybe some nice scores. Got Stormy in Saratoga. Bolo made me a boatload of money going gate to wire at Santa Anita. So, I just think the way this race can set up, Circus Maximus is certainly a horse you gotta consider as well. But if I can get that morning line 7-2 or above, I'm going to be pushing pretty hard here on Uni.
JK, we'll save your final selection for the final answer show later in the week, but talk about this race in terms of, do you see it as one where you're going to narrow down in the pick six, or one where you're going to be casting a wider net?
I agree. I mean, I like Uni. I like Lord Glitters, Circus Maximus. I think my strongest opinion here is who I'm against, and that's Got Stormy. Got Stormy was in unbelievable form this summer at Saratoga when she won the stake race, came back in 7 days and won the Grade 1, the 4-star Dave. And she did it visually impressively, but she got a nice setup that day. They ran in front of her. The horses that all hit the trifecta, Got Stormy, Raging Bull, and Uni, all came from out of it. The race kind of fell apart. And then she shows up in the Woodbine Mile, and she's beat by a horse in El Tormenta. No offense to our Canadian friends, but I want nothing to do with this horse. And she beat Got Stormy. And I don't care that Got Stormy moved a little bit early. That's not an excuse when she's getting ready to face some of the best that she's seen. I think she's going to be a little bit overbet because she's an American horse that's a filly with a name that we all remember, and a horse that captivated us visually in the 4-star Dave. My strongest opinion in this race is that it's an anti-opinion on Got Stormy.
And Got Stormy, there is a lot of narrative associated as well. The whole Tepin 2.0 angle pushed by Mark Casse, and you can see why. I mean, she's obviously got a ton of talent, but I don't disagree that there's a chance she'll be overbet in this spot. Scott Coles, how do you see it?
So I have a really tough time with this race. The one thing I did want to point out before I go against JK here is the pace projector. And if you read the bottom, it's another cool feature. It kind of just gives you the blurb, and kind of, if you don't know what that means, it kind of tells you what to do. It says the pace projects to be a slow one. The advantage goes to the horse, so it'll be close to the early pace. I wish I had the riding instructions for Got Stormy and Uni, etc. I wish I knew more about Circus Maximus. I have a lot of work to do on this race before I'd even touch it in the Breeders' Cup betting challenge. But as far as the pick six goes, I will be using a ton of horses because I just don't have a lot of confidence. I reluctantly put Got Stormy on the top of my selections that I'd sent in before the show just because of the draw is the farthest inside. The excuse I'm trying to make is that the 2 times on turf that Got Stormy's run poorly have both been on softer ground. Last time was good, and a while back when October of 18 when she ran a clunker it was soft. But other than that, she's been pretty good. I hated the last race. It was annoying to watch. It looked like she lost focus, started drifting in. But I worry that Uni's too far out, and I just don't know enough about Circus Maximus. That's why I always call you, PTF, to find out a little bit more about the European form. I have a lot of work to do, but those are the 3 I'm focusing on most. I really wish Bowie's Hero would have drawn better, Lord Glitters would have drawn better, but with the slow pace, I'm leaning towards those 3 and hoping that they're ridden more forwardly.
JK, you had another thought here?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I like to use stats for and is with the angles. I will. One of the things I did was like for Santa Anita. I went to the angles. I went to Santa Anita Park. I went to the turf, and I went to the mile. So I just wanted to look at the turf miles at Santa Anita. And I went to profile horse, and I made the horse's run style early or early presser, essentially meaning that the run style that's been assigned to the horse based on his previous performances is one that's forward. And in the last 5 years, only 12% of horses that are marked as early or early presser win on being forward like that. And I think that's important because I think a lot of people think that California racing is very speed heavy, and that turf mile on the firm turf is going to help horses that are more forwardly placed. But in reality, only 12% for horses that are forward like that. It's not really a strong number. It gives me a little bit more confidence in Uni.
That's counterintuitive and a really good piece of info. And I'll pause in general just to talk about one of the things I like about Stats Racelens is we all come up with these ideas, these narratives or anecdotes about things we think might be the case. And with this tool at your disposal, you have the chance to test that. And especially when you can find something that goes against the grain, there's an opportunity in terms of giving yourself an edge that the crowd doesn't have. And those are the type of factors that are more likely to not be priced in correctly. And even though, we're very selection oriented on the podcast, we give our picks. at the end of the day, this is a game about betting on prices, not on horses. And the Stats Racelands tools give you an opportunity to get the best of it when it comes to those numbers because of the type of data testing that the panel have been talking about so far in the show. All right. That said, let's move along to the Breeders' Cup Distaff, a race where we've talked at length on the other shows about our desire to try to take a shot against Midnight Bisou. For me, the two of the key rivals I was looking for to maybe take her on both got draws I don't like, and I'm finding myself coming straight back to her. But so often in this game, it's a case of first thought, best thought. And I'm hoping that somebody on the panel can give me an idea so I can go back to the idea of at least trying to, with some of my money in this pick six, oppose Midnight Bisou. I'm certainly not leaving her off the tickets completely. Matt, we'll go back to you. Do you have an idea on how we can get this one beat, or am I taking the wrong approach and I should be leaning into Midnight Bisou in this spot?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Kind of the same way where I keep coming back to Midnight Bisou, and it's a horse that's done well at Santa Anita. Just there's nothing bad to really say about the horse. I mean, you look at the PPs and there's just not much to knock on. The one area I will say, just on a pace scenario, is if Serengeti Empress can just step out and get to the lead and go, and somehow, some way hang on. That's really the only other idea I can really come up with here, because I do think Midnight Bisou is that good. And I think Serengeti Empress might have a bit of a pace advantage. Again, whether that formulates and plays out, I'm not sure. But, man, Midnight Bisou is quite a horse, quite a story, and certainly a horse I'm leaning on. But how I like to play it is I spend a lot of time on pace and using the true odds and giving different spots and looking at different ways of where I see the horses are going to line up and plan out that pace. That's one of the scenarios that I can come up with. I think you got to take a look to see how the track's playing as well, leading into this race over the past, the prior day and races earlier on. But Pete, that's one of the only areas I can really come to, but Midnight Bisou is going to be a lean on for me with a little bit of Serengeti Empress.
Mentioning Serengeti Empress means I have to bring it back to Jonathon Kinchen. Famously has a head-to-head wager that Serengeti Empress will not win another Grade 1 this season. JK, you dodged a bullet up in Saratoga where she ran a winning race. If Matt's pace scenario comes true here, you could be sweating big time as they turn for home. How are you? Any chance you might hedge a little and use a little Serengeti Empress to try to get yourself out from under the crushing defeat you might meet at the hands of our friend Craig Burnett?
No, I actually don't like Serengeti Empress from a pure handicapping standpoint. I feel like Paradise Woods drawing down to the inside is a big problem for her, and I think it's a great setup for Midnight Bisou. With what the pace is projected to be with Paradise Woods being down on the inside. If you look at Paradise Woods, you'll notice that some of her workout comments and the comments of people that I trust looking at workouts suggesting that she's been very aggressive. She's drawn to the inside. She obviously has speed. I've also heard from a lot of people that this racetrack, the kickback has been a little bit more aggressive than it typically is. And I just don't think riders, horses, or connections are going to want to rate horses that don't need to be rated. I feel like Paradise Woods is going to go from the inside. She's going to hook up with Serengeti Empress and set it up for someone to come from off the pace.
All right, we've got one more panelist to give the thought in here. Maybe break the tie a little bit. Scott Coles, what do you think is going to happen in the Breeders' Cup Distaff?
I see a little bit of both of what they're saying. I have Midnight Bisou on top. I mean, the horse has just overcome everything, and with Paradise Woods getting that draw, that was one that I was gonna try and see if I could find a way for Paradise Woods to be the winner here. But with that draw, I mean, how fast she's gonna have to get out of there and hope that she breaks. And if that happens, then like JK said, then Serengeti Empress is not gonna get away as easily. And if they do let Serengeti Empress get away, I will have a little bit of saver money there. I just think either way, it just sets up Midnight Bisou running down the lane. The horse has just been amazing, and I'm not going away from there for most of my plays.
Are you convinced, JK, that being anti-Bisou is the wrong strategy in here?
No, I think that no matter what anyone says, going against Bisou from a mathematical standpoint, from a wagering standpoint, from a price standpoint, is always going to be the right choice. Now, hindsight's 2020. When she wins by 4, you're going to feel like it was the wrong choice. But I think that's an issue that we have in horse racing as horse players is we become too results oriented and don't trust the process. The process says you're supposed to be against Bisou based on her performances, based on the fact that she's undefeated at a mile and a 16th, but she's lost 4 times going a mile and an eighth and beyond. Look, yes, she had some great races at a mile and an eighth, and one of the greatest races we've seen in a long time in the personal instant against the late. But I still think there's an opportunity to beat her. Now, with that said, one of my other favorite parts of Racelands is using the research button when you're looking at the PPs and kind of setting up some different parameters to see. And I was looking at jockeys the past year in dirt routes, and I was shocked to see that Paco Lopez is 30% in dirt routes. And for a rider who I don't think most people would think he's winning 30% clips very often, he really excels on the dirt. Mike Smith obviously being the best in this race, winning 33%, 29 wins out of 89 starts. That's strong numbers. And so obviously Mike can get her around there without any issue. I just think that her price is going to be entirely too short.
Fair enough. All right, let's move on to race number 11, the penultimate race at this year's Breeders' Cup. It's the Breeders' Cup Turf. And, JK, we're going to keep it with you here. Again, you don't have to give your final selection, but where are you leaning in the Breeders' Cup Turf?
I mean, I guess my heart wants to lean to Bricks and Mortar. He's been so cool all year. He's been so fun. He's shown us so many magnificent performances. And but part of me just keeps taking a look at Channel Maker. Horse is tactical.
Really?
He's forward. He'll get the distance. It's Bill Mott. It's Johnny V. It's an opportunity for him to kind of catch some of that firm ground. He's run here in the past on the West Coast. He hit the board in both grade ones that he ran in California. And so I think that he's got an opportunity to run well here. And he has those races sometimes he just throws at you that are just freaky good. And I think he might be a little bit ignored. So Channel Maker is interesting. The Europeans and Old Persian and Anthony Van Dyke also interesting. And then Bricks and Mortar. I just don't like the fact that this seems like a secondary decision. Chad is the best turf trainer in the United States, and he's been saying over and over again that this horse needs to run the mile. And then suddenly they pivot to this race. It's a little bit concerning.
At Vagvolgyi, who's going to win this year's Breeders' Cup Turf?
I'm agreeing with JK of just the thought of Bricks and Mortar. I want to keep going back to this horse. I love the heart of this horse, and I keep looking at the distance limitations, and I agree. I think there's some confusion as where this horse was going to be spotted, and it just makes me want to look for other alternatives. And the one that I settled on was Old Persian. I just think, again, when you look at the distance, when you look at that Woodbine race, I envision on a pace perspective being very, very similar. You may have a horse run off with either the 8 or the 2 Acclimate. They may hook up as well. I just think you see a quicker pace up front. I think Old Persian can sit in a great spot, will be a little bit more forwardly placed, and I think can run them all down in the lane. So I think it's going to be a cavalry charge for the wire, but Old Persian is the horse I'm going to lean on a bit here in the 11th.
Scott Coles, do you have any love for Bricks and Mortar?
Oh, I love Bricks and Mortar. I think Bricks and Mortar had something left. I was fortunate enough to be at the Arlington Million at my home track, and it was so cool watching him run. Trying not to be so biased with a lot of the horses that are running this weekend and actually use my brain, but Bricks and Mortar on top for me. I mean, there's no Enable, no magical types in here. The other one that I am using is the exact same horse that Matt's using. I am very intrigued by Old Persian. It won't be like a stone cold single situation for me, and I'm gonna have to watch the board. I mean, because there's a chance that Bricks and Mortar gets bet down to an unplayable level. But if there's a price anywhere around the morning line on bricks and mortar, I'll be taking my shot. But if not, I mean, horses like Old Persian or a couple of the others that I'll dive more into are in play.
I don't see a whole lot between Old Persian and Anthony Van Dyke, and I think Old Persian might be a better price. We'll talk a lot more about the European runners on the Final Answer show, and I also want the opportunity to pick the brain a little bit more of my good buddy Rob Dove, one of the top 10 pro punters in the UK today, and hopefully we can bring you some of his thoughts on that show as well. And with that, we move on to the Breeders' Cup Classic. What an important race this is. Obviously, the anchor leg of the Pick 5, the Pick 6, typically the race that decides who wins the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. And Scott, we're going to keep it with you. You mentioned you're playing in the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge, but I'm still going to ask you to reveal something and let us know what you're thinking in terms of who you're most likely to be keying around when we get to the Breeders' Cup Classic.
I'll reveal my pick when Benny South Street reveals his.
Did you catch that on Twitter, by the way? For those that don't know, he was reluctant to give his pick in the Classic for fear that another great contest player, the computer modeler Tony Joe, famous from the World Horse Players Tour, would somehow find a way to use that information against him. And then a few hours later, sure enough, Tony showed the little bit of code that he was going to put in his program to remind him, based on clues that Benny gave, to bet $1 more than Benny on this horse if he was in a position to do so. Pretty funny stuff.
I found it amusing, especially when he wouldn't give the pick out on the podcast with you guys. But so I had future bets on McKenzie. Heart was broken when the horse didn't run and I didn't get my money back in the Derby last year. I've been painfully riding this out and loyal to a fault maybe, but I still think McKenzie's winning this race. I came up with an interesting angle, which doesn't mean McKenzie's going to win the race, but an interesting angle that I created with Bob Baffert I think is worth a look. And you're not going to see a great success score ROI because it's Bob Baffert, but in the last, I think if you sort by a year, I'm not sure if this is exactly right, but he's hit the board in just about every race, if not every race, at grade 1 routes at Santa Anita when he has a horse morning line, and I did do research further, and they all ended up going off at less than 3-1. It's an interesting stat, which shows he gets him ready to run. It's Bob Baffert, and you can at least key McKenzie first, second, and third, and kind of build from there. And I can at least bet with confidence that he's at least going to be in one of those spots and kind of figure it out from there. And the more people hate on McKenzie, the more it makes me want to pick the horse, because I'm hoping that I get a price that you can't even imagine. The times that I've lost at 2-5 are the ones that are really embarrassing, but the times, if you're going to get McKenzie at 3-1 or higher, and that actually holds up, which I don't know if it will, but if it does, it excites me quite a bit more. I'm still a believer. I just don't think this field's that great. I'll definitely be looking at Vino Rosso. I don't love the 10 hole. Code of Honor getting the 11 is kind of even tougher. I think Warville probably goes through the inside, and then it's all horses that want to be in back. And McKenzie gets the first run, can get a position, and I'm hoping Joel rides McKenzie forwardly, and I'll have a little bit of late. I'm looking more at Yoshida. I've got some other things to figure out with the other California horses, but I am a McKenzie believer till the end, and one time, get me my money back.
Scott Cole's McKenzie truther. I like it. And I think there is a chance you will get that 3-1. The vibes are fine around McKenzie, but they're so strong around some of these other contenders, Code of Honor, Elate with the narrative of 10 years from Zenyatta. I'm sure that's going to get played up on the broadcast. I think it's going to be a lot of money for her. I'd probably take the under on her going off price of the morning line of 6-1. I think she'll go shorter than that. I suggested to JK the other day that Code of Honor could even go favorite in the race. We'll see. Maybe I was over exuberant with that one. Matt Vagvolgyi, how do you see this year's Breeders' Cup Classic?
Well, I find it interesting. Scott and I were chatting before, and he was the first one that I've asked where the first horse that came out of his mouth was McKinsey, and I find that to be so odd. I've asked so many people, just, hey, who do you like in the Classic, and not one of them, other than Scott, said McKinsey, and literally either the first or the second horse that came out of everyone's mouth was Vino Rosso. I'm very interested to see the price on Vino Rosso and Code of Honor as well, especially Vino Rosso. I don't think you get the 4-1. It's going to be a fascinating board to see also where McKinsey ends up as well. I think Yoshida's got some interest here. But this is a race where, I think I want to emphasize a couple things and give you an idea of why I really like Stats, and in my opinion, why this platform is worth it, top to bottom, is the angles that you can create. And they don't necessarily have to be something you automatically gravitate towards, but there were a couple angles on Code of Honor that I'll use to kind of give an idea of some things that I'm looking at. And one of them that I titled, 3-year-olds against older in graded stakes. And what I did with the angle was, obviously, 3-year-old horse against older, but has won the last 2 out against older. And I like to see that progression. And obviously you look at ROI, you look at the success score and win percentage. I mean, you're pretty much looking at a pretty solid angle. Is it something you should jump on and just say 100%, this is where I'm going? No, but that's why I love it. You can really, Pete, you alluded to it before. You can really think out loud and say, you know what, I think this might be something, but let me see if I'm on something or onto something, right? And you can run the stats, you can run the information and see it right in front of you. And I think that's one of the best things about it. Another angle too that comes up with Code of Honor is a lot of discussion about the surface at Santa Anita and the major change and getting much deeper. So I wanted to take a look to see, all right, last race in New York. So I had last race dirt in the Naira circuit shipped to Santa Anita, and I want to see how these horses have done. And I looked at the year mark to really give a good idea of a subset of horses that have run over this quote unquote new surface. And it shows pretty strongly that New York shippers have done very well out at Santa Anita. They've been able to handle that surface pretty good. So it's something that I also looked at some other tracks as well. I looked at Keeneland shippers. I looked at Park shippers. I find it interesting, over a 5-year period, there's only been 3 horses that have won shipping from Parks to Santa Anita. Not a lot in terms of a subset, but these are some of the things that you can do in terms of thinking out loud. And I don't know if we can show it, but there was one I did with Keeneland on the same type of stature where looking at shippers from Keeneland coming into Santa Anita on the dirt, how have they fared. Now, granted, the subset isn't large. There's only a few horses there that met the criteria. But what I felt was interesting is, if you look at the horses that have run over the last year, and if you look at horses that have run over the last 6 months, you can see I'm not sure. I'm not sure how these horses are handling it. You look at wins here at Keeneland, 12 total starts with 0 wins. It's just something to think about. I think it's something to consider, something to look at when it comes to dirt races in this different surface. I think the New York horses have been handling it. Maybe some other tracks haven't. But again, I think this really encapsulates why I really love Stats. And you can really think out loud and put your thoughts down to a system to give you some stats.
I love the ability to do that type of back testing and to come up with different hypotheses, and then also potentially be reminded of horses that meet these criteria going forward. It's a powerful tool. JK, you were leaning the Vino Rosso direction when we had our quick conversation for our mini pod at the draw. Is that still where your mind is going, or are you reserving the right to come up with something else here before we get to our final answer show tomorrow night?
I got to be honest with you, this damn Stats Raceland's kind of ruined that for me a little bit. I was looking up just dirt routes and grade 1 stakes in the last 5 years, and Todd Pletcher, what's your guess, Pete? What's his percentage? Past
Todd
5
Pletcher,
years, dirt routes, grade 1s. Todd Pletcher.
Grade 1s. I mean, I figure Todd Pletcher is usually 20% at least in every single category.
There it is. He's 11%. I was shocked when I saw that he was 11%. That doesn't make me feel great about Vino Rosso. I've been kind of on and off with Vino Rosso. Here's what I'm looking for, and here's why I kind of temporarily landed on Vino Rosso and why he's the horse I'll use. In this 1.25 mile race, on this racetrack, the way that we talked about the kickback earlier, we talked about California racing and how being forward in dirt races is just where you want to be despite the kickback. I thought the fact that Vino Rosso could be kind of close, he's drawn to the outside, he'll be in the clear. Those are all things I liked. But I thought his performances, his last couple of races were good. He's been training lights out. I think I'm going to kind of start to move a little bit more towards who is a 1.25 mile horse, who is a horse that's going to be forwardly placed, and one that I think I can get a good price on. I like McKenzie. Look, I'm waiting for that annoying Twitter handle, racing, whatever, the one that talks about poorly aged racing tweets. I know they're waiting to get me. Because on December 26th of last year, I said McKenzie's going to win the 2019 Breeders' Cup Classic. If he wins, I'm going to look smart. If he loses, I'm going to have to get mad and probably fight that person who runs that Twitter account. But all jokes aside, I think if everything goes the way that he wants it to go, if he's ridden aggressively, if he's put on the lead, I actually spent some time this morning talking to Bob Baffert at the Breakfast Marquee at Santa Anita, and from all accounts, he's going to be ridden aggressively. He's going to be put in the race, and then Bob feels like once he gets put in the race, then he'll settle a little bit. He thinks he'll finish, rather than the kind of push button rides he's gotten the last 2 times, which is probably why Mike was replaced with Joel Rosario. So I like McKenzie, but ultimately I'm leaning towards a late to run well. I'm not saying I'm necessarily going to pick her. I just think that she's a forward, galloping type horse. They're going to put her kind of in the race. She's not going to be last. She'll be sitting, I would guess, 4th or 5th. I thought her last race at Keeneland was more of a prep. There's no reason for her to be trained and cranked. And I spend a lot of time with this really annoying guy who always says Bill Mott with a target. And so, with that said, this is the target. So I think a late's going to run really well. She's the type of horse that I'd like to key in situations, but you have to be aware of Pete's point that the Zenyatta narrative might catch up to her in terms of her price.
She couldn't look any better in training. I'll tell you that much. But it is funny, and I'm, I think I'm going to make fun of you right now, but I'm ultimately going to mean this as a compliment, because as horse players, as we get more information, as we have time for our thoughts to develop, it is only smart to allow your opinion to change. If you just dial down into we say sometimes we do say first thought, best thought, but the fact of the matter is, if you dial down into every first thought, you're going to get yourself into trouble. But I thought you claimed on the show we did after the Spinster that you were not only getting divorced from Elate, but that there was a better chance of you get back together with your ex-wife than there was of you betting Elate in the Breeders' Cup Classic. So,
well,
am I remembering?
Look, as long as you don't make me get back, as long as you don't hold me on my feet to the fire and make me get back on my ex-wife, I'll answer that question.
Fair enough.
No, here's the thing. Honestly, one of the reasons I love going to the Breeders' Cup early is I just like hanging out, talking to people, asking questions, hearing this, hearing that, so-and-so this. There's a horse running in the Juvenile that was described to me by a Hall of Famer, I won't say if it's a trainer or a rider, as looking like he could be favored in the Classic. He looks so good. That's the information that I need when I'm making my final decisions. That's Dennis's moment, by the way. But, look, I reserve the right to change, because the truth of the matter is I'm not here just giving picks. I'm here talking through the races, and I'm going to have 2 entries in the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. So I'm going to be firing away. So I apologize, but I can't stay married to the pick. I got to keep moving if I gather more information.
Fair enough. I want to ask we got a question actually about the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. Are all 3 of you playing in it? We know Scott is. We know JK is. Matt, are you going to be getting involved as well?
I will be firing away, PTF. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Some other questions that came down the pike here. A couple people wanted to know about best bets for the entire Breeders' Cup. Scott Coles, will start with you on that one. Maybe you're not fully prepared. Maybe you haven't done all the races as well as you've done the pick six, but what's your gut as to your strongest opinion on the 2 days from here?
Oh man. As of right now, I would say, most likely winner or are you looking for?
Well, I think usually when people say best bet, they kind of mean the spot you're the most excited to play, the race you're most excited to play. But honestly, you can answer it any way you want.
The spot I'm most excited to play is to be in a position to win the BCBC with McKenzie, because of everything in the BCBC is going to come down to that last race. It's going to be extremely exciting. I've been rooting for McKenzie for the whole career, and I have the once in a lifetime opportunity of playing for a $3 million bonus because of winning the MHC. So, if you put all of that into perspective, that's going to be possibly the most exciting 2 minutes of my entire life, assuming I haven't blown my entire bankroll before then.
I love
it. What I'm most looking forward to is McKenzie, or I also reserve the right to change my opinion or change the price I need depending on where I'm at. But as of right now, I would say McKenzie is what I'm most looking forward to.
How about you, Matt? Same question. Your best bet / race you're most looking forward to betting.
I would say the race I'm looking forward to betting is the 9th in the Turf Mile. I'm going to go back to Uni again. I'm really interested to see, what this board looks like, what the price is on this horse. I keep coming back to this horse in this race. I think if you look at all the races we talked about today, that's certainly one that I'm going to be very intent on looking at. And I just think I'm excited to watch Sister Charlie run. I just listen, if I'm in it, if I'm betting it, whatever. I think it's a really, really cool horse, and really interested to see how that race unfolds. But I think you make a great point about when you're handicapping these races, especially at the point we are now going into Breeders' Cup weekend, you've got to change your opinions. Things change, things happen, or if you're looking at the board, I would say don't turn smart into stubborn. Don't just because you pick the horse or love this horse on Wednesday, you look at the board and it's not what you expect, and you just have to bet it. You have to be willing to get off a horse and to look elsewhere and to find the value that you think is important. So, I think it's not a bad thing to change your mind as you're going through this, but those are the couple of horses that I would look at.
JK, your best bet from here.
Okay, so my best bet is Chancelot. I think he's going to run really well in this spot. But I think that more importantly, my biggest piece of advice I would give the attendees or the listeners is here are some things that I keep telling myself over and over again as a reminder as I'm going through all of these races. One is I'm not using West Coast turf horses. I'm just not doing it. It's a rule that I have. I'm not doing it. So I'm not wasting any money on Basilica, whatever, whatever horse. It's the 14 and the juvenile turf. I'm not using any of those West Coast turf horses. That's one thing. The second thing is I'm going to tread lightly with horses that are drawn to the inside. The rail has not been ideal, and they're either going to go too fast to get to the front on a less than ideal part of the racetrack, or they're going to take back and eat some of that nasty kickback that we've talked about is probably going to be problematic. The other thing is I'm going to upgrade horses that have run or have been training in California with the deep racetrack. We've heard it a lot about how deep the racetrack is, and I think that's going to be an advantage. So those are just some axioms I'm going to be using along the way to kind of help me find some final answers in these races.
We got a question about the bias, actually, and I would say, like the old Mike Maloney line about if you're going to dance with bias, you better do so on your toes. I think that was never truer than these 2 days. I get what you're saying in theory, JK, and I think that's something to be aware of. But the fact of the matter is we're going to have a lot of clues to get to understand this bias a lot better from the races on the undercard on Friday, and then, of course, all of Friday when looking to Saturday. So I get it. In theory, it seems like there's a trend in racetrack management where the rails can be a bit deeper. I think there's a theory that it creates a safer racetrack. I don't know if that's right or not, but it does seem like around the country we've seen a lot of deep / dead rails, but then tracks that play pretty evenly from the 2-path out to the 5-path. What advice, JK, do you have for listeners who are looking to get a handle on the bias before they go too far with that idea? Because, I mean, we've got some big favorites here with potentially really difficult draws if the inside is bad. Paradise Woods comes to mind. Kofefi comes to mind. Even Dennis's Moment comes to mind. Give us a little bit of insight into how you're going to be assessing this track bias in real time over the 2 days of the Breeders' Cup.
I feel inclined to do that really corny thing. You go, oh, well, Pete, well, thanks for asking. I actually have great advice for that. Look, I think that one thing I'm going to do is, look, we're all overwhelmed with 14 races, championship races with classy horses, more than we can handle in grade ones, and interesting storylines and greatness and Hall of Famers. We get tied up to those 14 races, and I think sometimes we forget about the other ones. One thing I'm going to do is the undercard on both days and as well as Thursday, I'm going to look at all the dirt races. And even if I don't get to dive deep from a handicapping perspective, I'm going to circle a couple of horses on a glance. We've all fast capped in the past. Fast cap those cards. See where those horses that you like, see where they run and how they run. If you had a horse circled in your fast cap, he gets loose on the rail and gets beat, there's something to consider there. If a horse swoops on the outside and you didn't give the horse a shot, there's something to consider there. So I would do as much work as you can on the undercard races and on the Thursday races without taking away from the excitement and the thrill of handicapping the 14 Breeders' Cup races, and have a better idea of the results that you saw. You don't want to be one of those people who just says, oh, the 8-horse won, the 9-horse won, the 12-horse won, the 10-horse won, the outside was good. That's not the case. You need to take a little bit of a deeper look, watch the head on, and I think you'll have a better idea of how the track's playing leading up to the Breeders' Cup races on Friday and Saturday.
Matt, you made a reference to bias before. Do you have anything to piggyback on to what JK is saying from here? Are you going to go in with any assumptions about the bias, or are you just going to take it as it comes?
No, I'm gonna agree with JK. It's something that I've learned from my early days of, if I'm just playing the late pick 4 or pick 5 or whatever it is, those are the only races I'm going to watch. It's so important to get as much of a real-time subset, especially on the dirt. Like I mentioned, with such a drastic change, you have to pay attention to it. So if you're just playing the Breeders' Cup races, that's fine. But I would take the time to watch these races and, not necessarily be a prisoner of the moment where something happens and automatically you jump and say, okay, I got to change my thoughts later on. Just pay attention to it. Like JK said, watch the trip. If a horse gets loose and dies on the rail, or there's horses coming off the pace, pay attention to it, make a notation of it. If you have the opportunity to handicap those races, something that I'll be doing, and just paying attention to see what my pace analysis is, what I think is going to happen, and then look at the results and see if I have any trends. And if I come to the conclusion that there is a bias, and some of these races that I am playing pretty heavily, it might alter my decision. And it goes back to being flexible, being flexible with your thoughts. You're not locked into a pick. You got to take it as it comes, but. No, just to piggyback on a lot of stuff JK said, I would say pay attention to those undercard races. I think it's very important.
Scott, how?
And the other thing, Pete,
you go ahead.
The other thing I'll add is, and Matt said a great point about, look, if you're kind of new to the bias game, don't dive in head first for the Breeders' Cup, right? I use it as more of a tiebreaker. So with a horse like Kofefi, who's drawn to the inside in the filly and mare sprint, I like her. I'm not going to then toss her because she drew the rail. But with a horse like Paradise Woods, who I was thinking about maybe trying to use, then I will use that as a tiebreaker. I think you can use it as a tiebreaker to maybe get off of, lean away from, or add another horse to your run, whatever wager you're looking to tackle.
Scott, how important is bias to your handicapping, and is it something, are you as concerned about it as Matt and JK for this year's Breeders' Cup?
I mean, I think it's been a really important thing on a lot of big days. It's just how early can you determine it's a real thing on the day, or how do you decide if it's in your head or not? And I think you have to watch every single race, and like JK said, and they've kind of both mentioned Matt a little bit too, is this you've just got to be aware of everything that's happening. I mean, just because one of your horses does gets stuck or doesn't, kind of dies, doesn't mean it's a bias, and the horse might not have run that way. But if you start seeing 30 to 1 shots riding up the rail and it becomes a highway, I mean, you got to be aware of that. If you start seeing everyone closing on the outside in dirt races, you got to be aware of that. But I mean, you have to have done the work ahead of time and know that if a horse wins, did you give that horse any shot or not? I mean, it's just, it's all about preparation. It's all about being able to adjust on the fly and just being aware of what happens. But you can't make that decision too quickly, just because one of your horses gets beat or something crazy happens. I mean, it just doesn't mean there's a bias, and it doesn't mean the track's not going to smooth out later. So it's definitely something that's been important on a lot of big days. We've gone back, but recognizing it in the moment or in the day, I mean, that's something you got to be very careful with.
I got a couple of questions that I'm just going to speed round through and I'll answer because we just have a couple of minutes left, and I do need to end this on time because of all the stuff we have going on out here at the Breeders' Cup. Question about if the draw in the mile is a problem for the likes of Lord Glitters and Uni. I personally don't think it is. These are both the hold-up runners. I mean, yes, it can, even for a closer, sometimes go wrong on a tight mile course from an outside post. But in the case of those two, I think they're both going to be able to drop out and make one run. And I'm not downgrading either one. And I'm hoping that people overreact and think that's a big deal. And we end up getting more of a price because Uni and Lord Glitters are two horses that I'm super interested in for the Breeders' Cup Mile. We also had a question about being out there this week. This one's for you and me, JK, about horses we thought looked particularly well in the morning. I mean, for me, my gold stars, now obviously I haven't seen every horse, but the horses who I saw in the flesh, who I'm definitely upgrading off of their visual appearance, Elate is on that list for me. Matoli is on that list for me. Dennis's Moment is on that list for me. Do you want to answer that one real quick, JK? Have you seen anything with your eyes that really impressed you in the morning that's going to make you put horses on tickets?
Look, I typically am a guy that just wants to make sure they have 4 legs and a tail, and I could probably even get by. I could probably even fade the tail if they're tailless. American Pharaoh had half a tail and saw what he did. I'll repeat what other people said that I respect. Matoli, Dennis's Moment, I've heard great things about. I heard good things about Bricks and Mortar. And there's going to be one more that I heard was looking good. I heard good stuff on Chancelot too. I've heard Chancelot looks good, and we saw Omaha Beach blow out today, and he's running great. Faster than I can run.
He looked great. I should have mentioned Omaha Beach. He's got a lot going on physically. A horse that looks like distance will be his friend. I think they probably made the right decision all in all with him. As a fan, I would have loved to see him in the Classic. Physically, he looks like he could certainly compete in the Classic, but I understand Richard Mandela in his life has probably never gone from a 6-furlong race to a 10-furlong race, but he looks very good. Coat, muscle, flesh, everything. Omaha Beach, another I'm glad you mentioned, JK. And the last question, and we will close on this one. We had a question about what is that promo code again? So if you go to the Stats Racelands website, you can navigate through Equibase, or you can go directly to Stats Racelands, and you use the promo code STATSITM, and you get discounts on any of the whether it's a monthly plan, an annual plan, you get a significant discount when you use that code. And then our friends at Stats know that you came from us. So we want you to use that code StatsITM over there. And I want to thank Matt Vagvolgyi, Scott Coles, JK, Tom from Equibase for putting this whole show together and doing the tricky job of keeping everything moving and allowing me to focus on hosting. Really appreciate that from him. Thanks most of all, as ever, to all of you for listening. This show has been a co-production of Equibase/Stats Racelands and In the Money Media. In the Money Media's business manager is Drew Coatney. That guy, JK, he's also our chief creative officer. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale. May you win all your Breeders' Cup photos.